Hi, I'm Matt, and on this episode today, we're going to be reflecting back on a little of what God has done over the past year. And I'm really excited for our conversation. I'm here with several members of our staff. Liz Judd, who is our Communications and Hospitality Director. Thanks for waving. You can't hear it, but she was waving. Very friendly vibe you're emitting today.
I did not want to interrupt you, but I did it anyway.
Well, I'm going to let you talk about yourself in just a minute, but okay. I've got Liz here, Stephen Mann, our worship arts pastor, and Sandra Lyon, our early childhood ministry coordinator. So in a nutshell, could each of you explain what you do and also what you love about what you do? So Liz, we'll start with you. What do you do around here?
Okay, so I am the Director of Communications and Hospitality at GFC, and that basically entails any of our social media, website, some of the graphics you see, some of the books you hold. And then our hospitality is just welcoming people on Sunday, making them feel comfortable, and getting people connected to the church.
Yeah, fantastic.
It's a good place to be. And what I love about working here is obviously my coworkers. And I just love getting to know people within the church. It's been really fun. I've been here almost 8 years, and it's just like, it's gone by so fast, but the people are really what make this place home.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Yeah, and you have a front row seat to see people connect into the life of the church in a really close way. So that's awesome. Stephen, what about you?
Yeah, well, in a nutshell, the core of what I do is obviously leading worship and preparing, and it's what I love to do, is to lead worship and to be in a room with people who are worshiping God is that's it for me, and of course serving with our band and volunteers and just really walking alongside them. And that is what I love. And then part of what people don't see probably as much is just some of the service logistics when we have some other elements like media or storytelling or maybe some of the welcome spotlights or just the different things that happen within a service, kind of bringing all that together and just celebrating what God's doing every Sunday.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what a lot of you who are listening, you don't see are the meetings we have behind closed. We have so many meetings. When you work on a church staff, you're like, what do? We just meet all day. But both Stephen and Liz are in a lot of meetings helping us think strategically about how to accomplish our mission and vision. And Stephen, you've been on our executive team, senior leadership team for several years. And Liz, both of you really help us accomplish our mission and vision. And I'm so grateful for that. So I wanted to add that. Now, Sandra, tell us what you do.
Well, I serve in early childhood ministry, which is serving the children who are the youngest at Grace Fellowship. So the infants through the kindergartners. I get to welcome those families that have children in that stage. I also get to work with the volunteers who welcome those children and families every Sunday. And it's a wonderful place to be. I'm super blessed that I've gotten to do this for about a decade and a half.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, it's so awesome the perspective you have. I mean, you've probably seen whole families come through and kids who are in diapers or grown. And
I have. One of the greatest blessings of this season is I'm seeing students come back to serve that I saw come down the hall as babies, as toddlers, as preschoolers. Wow. And when they return to serve, it's just a wonderful thing. They have some memories. They have memories of 3 and 4 year old years of coming down that hall and, what it meant to them. And so it's great to see them want to come back and be a part of that as a leader.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's great to have all of you here today. You're all wearing black, which I don't know if you coordinated that.
We coordinated.
This is not going to be a depressing podcast.
Right. I know. Reflective, though.
Yeah.
I probably missed the email. I'm not wearing black. But it's going to be so great to have each of you in your perspective. So recently, I came across a verse that I want to share as we get started. Psalm 116, verse 7. Return to your rest, my soul, for the Lord has been good to you. So let me read it again. Return to your rest, my soul, for the Lord has been good to you. I think this is such a beautiful verse. Return to your rest. What do you think about when you hear that? Stephen, what do you think about when you hear that phrase, return to your rest?
Yeah, I think that there is a sense when you rest, sometimes, I think about him making us rest. Sometimes we have to be made to rest, but there is a dependence. It's a vulnerable state to rest, but it's also a place where we can just let God be God and know and understand and find our comfort in him as our Father and returning to rest. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because I guess we flee from it.
Yeah, isn't that
We
interesting?
run from it, and it's
Return to your rest.
Return to it.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Liz or Sandra, when you think about that phrase, return to your rest?
For me, it's like I can't return if I had never been there. So it's hard for me to digest a little because I feel like I'm always just so busy.
Sure.
But yeah, hearing you say that and contemplating it for a second, I'm thinking, yeah, he never meant for us to be in a state of hurry in the first place. Like, we need to return to the state he wants us to be in.
Yeah.
We can be comfortable and we can rest in that he's got it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think in ministry sometimes, like, we're the conduits of what God's doing.
Sure.
But sometimes we can feel like we have to take it on and we have to control certain things and or else, you know?
Yeah.
And that's not the case. So
Right.
that's
right.
good.
That's a
Good
good
thought.
point.
Yeah, I think about I'm in a study now. We've been looking at Sabbath and looking at scripture that tells us not to do or not to do, but to remember
Yeah.
remember the Sabbath. That it was that again was something that we came from. So if we're created by God, He's our
Yeah.
creator. That we were created by Him, and so there was rest was a part of us from creation.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, it's interesting to me. Return to your rest, my soul, for the Lord has been good to you. Just the connection between those two ideas, that there is a rest, a peace, a contentment that comes when we reflect on the goodness of God to us. And God has been really good to us as a church, hasn't He?
Yes.
Yes.
Definitely.
Just amazing to consider. And so let me just ask you guys first. So we're ending 2023. A lot has happened. You three represent a lot of different ministry areas at GFC. How have you seen God work in your particular ministry area this past year? We'll start with you, Sandra. How have you seen God at work in
Yeah.
early childhood?
So we've been growing a lot on our hall in numbers, but numbers is really not at all what it's about.
Yeah.
It's about the people that God brings and the stories that He's writing in the lives of people. And so we've just seen Him working in the people that He's bringing to us and how He's joining people together. Just there's a lot of different kinds of families, different kinds of stories that He's weaving together with the people that He's bringing. And so that's just been a beautiful thing, I think, to see different kinds of families, families with stories of foster care adoption, families with stories of children who are impacted by disability, just many different kinds of families, families that are grandparents raising grandchildren, and seeing just who God is bringing us and how He's connecting us together. And that's just been really good.
Oh, that's great. And one of the things I love about working with you, Sandra, is you know, you said it so well. It's not about the numbers, it's about the people. And I think you are one of the staff who helped lead all of us in making sure we're seeing the people. And you've always been that way, and I just appreciate your heart.
Thank you, Matt.
Stephen, what about you?
Yeah, well, zooming out a little bit, I remember just a couple years ago with the COVID world.
We don't speak
we-
of COVID.
Well, some of those Sundays, I know you remember, we were leading worship for an empty room and to video cameras, and that was it. And knowing that there were people on the other side, but just how that season, in a sense, was kind of the winter. Felt like winter. Just felt barren.
Right.
And I think that 2023 for the service and the worship times has felt more like spring. Things are warming up, thawing out, new life.
Yes.
So I've felt that for sure this year. That's been one of the ways it's been a landmark year. It's just felt like there's a new life. I've heard a lot of people reference that too. There feels like there's a new energy and people worshiping God. And as far as just different things to celebrate this year, I think one of the big ones for me was Baptism Sunday. And that was just such a unique time where we started having a few baptism signups, and then more, and then more, and then a few more. And then it was, okay, logistically, if we do what we normally do, we'll just, we'll be here till 4 o'clock. But so we kind of pivoted and had a baptism service, and then even changed how we did it, just to celebrate how God was working in the lives of people, and changed the format a little bit. But to me, it was just such a great example of how God is working in new ways, and how just hearing stories of of life change. That was one of the big
Yeah.
highlights for me. But I do think there's been, this year as far as worship arts and the band, we've tried to engage in different ways and even tried different songs we that are a little outside of our wheelhouse and challenge us a little bit, and more singers, more musicians, just to invite a spirit of engaging, responding to who God is, what He's done for us. So, when I think back on this year, it's been that, just how God has, just even in that service time, the worship time has worked in so many different ways.
Yeah, and we're all nodding. You can't hear, that, but
We're
there has
agreeing.
been an energy and just an excitement about what God is doing.
Yeah.
And you can feel it on Sundays. So, Liz, what about you?
I have seen so many stories come out of 2023 like I haven't seen in years past. Like, I feel that, like you said, there's an energy. With hospitality, I get to meet so many new people. We've had like over 200 new people identify themselves this year so far, and they have come from all different areas, which kind of bleeds into what I do with communications, because we launched TikTok this year.
Ooh,
Which
watch
was
out.
scary.
No,
you
Steven
know?
and Sanja, they're TikTok savvy.
Yeah, for sure. Y'all have been on our TikTok and might not have even known it. You're helping. But Sabrina Pershing, she is on staff with us, and she works with me in communications, and she is in her 20s. And so I said, here, TikTok, you try this, and let's just see what happens. But we've seen growth from it. We've had young people come to the church, listen to this podcast because they found it from TikTok, which is so cool.
Yeah.
We've had the Vision Sunday had a huge impact on just the community at large. I can't tell you how many people I've met in hospitality at the New Year table on a Sunday, and they said, I saw the new vision statement and I had to check this church out.
Wow.
Like, something about it has really just resonated. And like you always say, we're all broken and vulnerable. That's the kind of church we are. We're not somewhere that's trying to, put up barriers before you even walk in the door. It's like, you're welcome here. We're all broken and vulnerable. So that's been really exciting. Some of the things, we've had opportunities to partner with ETSU this year, which, because of COVID and all the things that have happened in the last few years, has been more difficult. They've been very selective, and I completely understand that. So we've had opportunities to go on campus and just be there for students. And we've opened up our cafe on Sunday, the cafe in the lobby during the week for students to come and study. And so that's been really neat to meet more young people that way. So there's just a renewed energy. And I think a lot of it is because people are finally coming out from just the COVID bubble we were all in. And I know it's like, it's funny, like we don't talk about that anymore, but it still was like such a relevant thing for people, especially young people. I feel like that really impacted formative years for them. And so to put themselves out there and take a step to come to church is tough, but it's been so rewarding. So it's been great.
Yeah, that's great.
That made me think about Liz talking about, Sabrina, who's a 20-something. Just our staff has really, God's been really faithful in the way that He's built us and kind of joined us together, I feel like, over the past couple of years for sure. And we are an intergenerational staff for sure. I was kind of a young one when I came on, but I'm an older one now. But I think the way that we all are working together, there's always been a great energy, but there's a synergy now of just because we really do carry the work together and we do it. But it's just really a great place to be as far as, I know that we're not just talking about staff, we're talking about the church and community, but it bleeds out and shares, I think it's contagious. It's contagious.
Yeah, you shared it, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, Sandra, but you shared, I don't know, a couple months ago, in your 15 years, you made a comment that this is the healthiest the staff has ever been.
It is.
Remembering
and
right?
It's always been a good place to be. But.
Yeah, and I just was so encouraged by that, and it's a tribute to all of our staff and the kind of culture that God has helped us, by His grace, create here, and it's just encouraging to hear that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and on that, I think that's one thing that's been a little different this year, kind of behind the scenes. There's been more collaboration on different things. So we've had creative team meetings to talk about new ideas that we could try out, and some meetings to kind of debrief for the services, how they went. And there's just been more of a team effort on some things, and then celebrating each other's wins. And and staff meetings and just rooting for each other.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, so the theme of today is kind of looking back and just celebrating what God has done. And all of you wear multiple hats in your role here. You have your ministry leader hat. You also have your church-wide staff and leadership hat. So I'm just curious, as you think about our church overall, you kind of zoom out. Is there anything that you haven't said that you would want to say that you've seen God work in and through GFC in a really remarkable way? Anything come to mind? From a whole church perspective?
I think there's been a big emphasis on prayer this year as a church, and we have, Sunday prayer meetings, Friday prayer meetings, and those have grown. We have, the prayer list that we send out to folks, and then the prayer wall, gfcnow.com/prayer. But we've had prayer nights, and those came out of, noticing that there was an emphasis on prayer for each other and for our community. So I feel like that's been really impactful for a lot of people. And I've enjoyed seeing that in the church.
That's really neat. Yeah. Anything else come to mind?
Yeah, I think of the prayer nights too that we had this year, and those being new and also kind of coming out of the vision. So with the change in the vision being broken and vulnerable people experiencing life in Christ it helps you look at yourself and where you are with the Lord and what God is doing in you first, and then offering and surrender to that in prayer, and then seeing how, as we submit that to God has been encouraging. And then also to add to that, what's been encouraging as a whole is just to see how generous people are here. And with Restore Ukraine a few months back, just the outpouring of coats and shoes and clothes for people in need that the Sunday of.
Right.
It wasn't a ramp up. It wasn't a campaign. It was just people responding. And then Mountain View, of course, there's just a generosity in bringing canned food. So I've been really encouraged just how responsive people have been in their personal walk, and then also in their generosity.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah, so we're thinking about generosity. I know that in the family life ministries that we've been able to do a lot of things in the environments where we're welcoming kids and students recently because of a generous gift. And so we've been able to do some things that have been tremendous in as far as making spaces just more warm and welcoming and inviting, so that children and students and families can come and connect and engage in the life of the church. So that's been tremendous, just to be thankful for God's provision there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's neat in different ways. I'm thinking about the three of you. All of you help facilitate environments where people can experience God's grace. Preschoolers, families, people who are online watching the service, people who are in the room. And that's just remarkable to think about how God has worked in all of the different environments this past year. And, everything we're talking about is only possible because of volunteers, right? And so it's kind of been a theme, behind what we've said. But just to be clear, so much of what God has done over the past year is through people serving and jumping in and being a part of what God's doing and giving their gifts and their time. And there's so much that happens in the life of a church that we don't even know. But it has been. I think for me, the biggest thing I'm taking away is just the vision change. That was a small change, but it really was profound, I think, for our church. And I think there's a greater ownership of it. And we kind of went right from Vision Sunday into a teaching series on 1 Corinthians, which was really about a broken and vulnerable church. And, hey, we're broken and vulnerable. And I don't know about you guys. I mean, it sounds a little, arrogant to say the teaching's been good, but just for me,
it has. It's okay.
Oh, thank you.
Right.
I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
it's great.
But for me, just in my study, and it really has been God driving that vision, broken and vulnerable people experiencing life in Christ, deeper into my soul through the teaching on Sunday mornings. And so anyway, volunteers and teaching, there's just been so much that God has done.
Yeah, and on that too, I've heard a number of people say, especially with the 1 Corinthians series, just the commitment to God's word is evident. And when you're progressing through and then you come to a difficult, not fun section or topic, to keep going and to keep to stay committed. And I really think that's had that's yielded a lot of fruit too for the congregation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Why are you laughing, Liz?
I just was thinking the Beautiful Mist series. There was like 3 weekends in a row there. We were like, whew, this is a lot. But
More
you know
mess
what?
than
We're not going to
beautiful.
separate it. We're
Yeah.
going,
Yeah.
right through. And so I appreciate him saying that out loud. I really hadn't thought about that. But there were
Yeah.
a couple weekends we were like, oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting to think about. We were going through all of that, which is really First Corinthians, a lot of it is pruning. It's really God's people having to grow in holiness, and it's painful, and to address parts of our lives right. And we were going through that at the same time that we were doing Love in Action, which was all about mobilizing people to love others outside the walls of the church, which is really cool. You know, our mission is building a community to reach a community, right? And I think this past fall, both of those things were happening in different ways. We were being built up, challenged, in connecting with God and one another, and reaching. And I think God really did some cool things through Love in Action, which just ended. So much to be grateful for. Were you going to say something else? No. Okay. So I touched on this at the beginning, that it's easy to not reflect on what God has done. I think there's a reason why the verse says, return to your rest. Think about Israel. Israel in so many ways, it's the story of people struggling with spiritual Alzheimer's, just this chronic forgetfulness about the goodness of God. And it's easy to judge Israel. I don't know if you guys ever feel this way. Sometimes I'm like, gosh, if I saw God part the Red Sea, I'd be fine, like for life. Like I wouldn't question. I'd be like, listen, he's going to provide. I wouldn't cry like these crybabies and say, let's go back to Egypt. But man, I see it in my own heart. I've seen God do more than part the Red Sea. I mean, he's raised me from the dead spiritually. I've seen him work in amazing ways. And yet, I doubt, and maybe I'm speaking, just to myself here, but God's people struggle with this, right? So I'm curious, just for all of you personally, do you struggle with forgetting the goodness of God ever? Have you mastered it? Or do you find yourself, you know what, I do struggle. I struggle to not reflect at times on God's goodness. Stephen, what would you say?
I've never struggled with
Oh,
this.
wow.
Yeah, I'm actually really, really good.
That's why you're in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All
Well,
the time.
you can teach the next podcast on this topic.
Yeah,
Really perfect.
happy to. It's when you're moving ahead, making progress. It's even harder to stop, and even in the midst of good things. I mean, to look back, it's hard to walk ahead and look back at the same time. So I think the verse you shared of resting and like slowing down is so important to remember. I mean, even in worship or in communion, is remembering what Christ did for us. Worshiping, a lot of worshiping is remembering who God is. We know, but we have to sometimes slow down, stop, and remember who God is and what He's done for us personally. So for me, I think in song and in singing, that actually helps a lot to remember those ways that He's been good to me. And it's for sure a struggle, because I like to move ahead. I like to problem solve and find solutions and keep going. But yeah, I think it is. It's an act of intention to slow down and to remember what God has done. And the year end is a great time to do that, because you can kind of look back and see what has been unique about the year. How has God worked in my life uniquely?
Yeah. Sandra, what about you? Do you ever struggle
Oh, I'm so
with
forgetful.
this?
I'm so forgetful of the goodness of God. I have a close friend who I also get to serve with that just recently, she was just kind of in the throes of December. December is like a lot's going on in December. And she was feeling a little overwhelmed. And we had some time together in prayer. And then we talked about looking at this past year and what all that God had done in her life. And a practice that both of us did just was really simple. We took our phones out and we went back through photos through the year, starting in January, because you can do that pretty easily, pretty quickly. But it became kind of a longer thing. But when you looking back at the pictures that we'd captured from our lives in this past year, you could see we could grab onto the things that God had been doing, the things that He brought us through. Just simple things. Some things were small, some things were big, some things were hard, some things were wonderful to celebrate. But just looking back over that, I think when we look back, we truly look back over things that we can't help but see the goodness and the faithfulness of God. But sometimes we just don't. I don't stop.
Yeah.
I don't stop. I stay in the busy,
Right.
moving forward, getting things done. I think as Stephen's kind of alluding to that. But when we do slow down, right, return and remember His goodness.
That's a great practical way to do this. I love that. Liz, what about you?
Yeah, I have a terrible time with just forging ahead. I feel like a lot of us on staff are this way. Like, we have ideas and we have goals and we just forge ahead to make those happen. And then, we celebrate it and then forget that it ever happened until we want to do something similar to it, or we do the same thing again. But, preparing for this podcast, I was kind of looking back through what we call behind the scenes the master calendar of all the things that go on in the church. And, looking back and just celebrating, there was back in last January, there was hundreds of people who joined a small group for the first time.
Yeah.
And we had a marriage conference in February that was parenting conference in February that was so impactful on so many families.
Yeah.
We had hundreds of women for an IF gathering. And the stories that came out of that event alone, that was early March of this year. I think we mentioned it, like Matt asking people to leave their coats and shoes. I think that was in March.
Yeah. Spring. Yeah.
It's just crazy because that feels like forever ago and yesterday at the same time. But part of that is because, we kind of moved to the next thing. And when you're in a church, one of the phrases is Sunday is always coming. And so we have to prepare for that. But we do have to be mindful of it's time to slow down. It's time to take stock of, what we've done and how far we've come and where God's brought us to. So I can be bad about that. But thankfully I have this calendar and it's saved. And so I can look back pretty easily and be like, oh yeah, that was great. We should do that again. You know?
And prepping for this has helped you. That's
Yeah,
why
definitely.
I asked you on this podcast.
Perfect.
I knew you needed to slow down.
Yeah, you're right.
And reflect. No,
That's
you're
right.
so right. And so many of us are looking ahead, windshield, not rear view mirror kind of people. And I'm certainly that way. And just in general, I tend to, my focus of attention almost always goes to what's missing or what's bad. I'm terrible at this, and so that's why I need reminders like this verse, like you guys, people in my life who will say, no, look what God's doing, and God's at work, because there's things that are always going to be missing or broken or vulnerable or whatever it might be. So I kind of want to connect this. We're a church, obviously, and we're talking to people who are spiritually minded. So even as you think about reflecting back and what Sandra recommended, maybe for somebody listening, they take out their phone, not while they're driving, but they look back over all their photos. What happens in us when we remember God's goodness, spiritually speaking?
For me, gratitude.
Gratitude.
Personally, I just think back of, how far we have come or how far He's brought me just personally in the last year, the last 5 years, the last decade. I mean, it doesn't take much to see God's hand in your life. I think that's important.
That's great. Other thoughts? What does that produce in us?
Right. I think God's provision too. And when you're moving ahead and progressing, you start to just think it's you and think that you're doing that. And then when you look back, you realize you weren't. It was God at work in lots of different ways. And Him, He allows us to serve. It's a privilege to serve. Yeah. It's a privilege to be a part of it. And I think, to me, looking back and reflecting on that is just a reminder of how God is at work and how He provides. And as Liz said, just being thankful and being grateful for how He works and how He can use us in what He's doing.
Yeah, I think when we remember that what He's brought us through, that He's with us, that we're encouraged then, and then we're able to persevere. We're able to press on into what He's got for us next.
Yes. One of the things I've been thinking about is it's really hard to trust God's faithfulness in the future if you're not remembering his goodness in the past. And, the two big questions age-old questions people struggle with is God all-powerful? Is God good, right? And I think a lot of times Christians will hold on to the doctrine of God's sovereignty, big word we use, and say, no, God's in control of everything. But what I find pastorally, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, a lot of people can grow up in church their whole lives, but they struggle to trust the goodness of God. That at the heart of God is overflowing goodness. He is good in all he does. And so one of the main reasons why we have to remember is we will forget and we won't trust him for the future, right? And so I just think that's really key. And one other thought on that, I love Psalm 23. Your goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And our confidence really is that God's goodness will keep following us, right? Even when we forget it, we push it away, and that's true for our church. I mean, think about that. God's goodness and mercy will follow us into this next year and all the days of our life. Pretty cool. So as we move towards ending this calendar year, I want to challenge all of you at this table, everybody listening, and myself, to an exercise. Like you need more things to do right now.
Yeah,
Everybody
for sure.
Liz is like, please give me more to-dos.
Let me do it, and then I'm going to look back on it and be thankful and appreciate the experience.
Okay, we'll have you on the
Yeah.
podcast January, and you'll report on how this goes.
Can't wait.
So here's the assignment. I want you to make a list of how you've seen God's goodness in 2023. So the verse that I shared, Psalm 116:7, return to your rest, my soul, for the Lord's been good to you. The next two verses are this, verse 8 and 9. For you, Lord, have delivered me from death, my eyes from tears, my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before the Lord in the land of the living. So maybe if you don't even know where to start, you think, God's goodness, that sounds abstract. Just ask this question, how has the Lord delivered me from death? Now you can think salvation, right? The psalmist says, God, you've delivered me from death. So for all of us, this past year, we can reflect on the reality that we have been delivered from death. We've been reconciled to God forever. But also ask these questions. How has the Lord delivered your eyes from tears, as the psalmist says? So this past year, where has God's redemptive goodness broken through into your grief, into your heartache, into your loneliness? Maybe it's through people. I mean, maybe it's through specific activities or ministry involvement at GFC. I don't know, but how has God broken through? And then how has God delivered your feet from stumbling, as the psalmist says? How has God protected you? How has he rescued you out of sinful habits or mistakes that you made? So you just write it out, and again, maybe that psalm, if you don't know where to start, it just helps you, Psalm 116. And then you just say, Lord, would you help me to rest in your goodness? And I need that. I think we all, talking around the table, maybe this is therapeutic just for us, but all of us, and maybe in particular church staff, we need to slow down and really pray, God, would you help me rest in the midst of the busyness? Would you help me rest in your goodness? And so I'm going to be praying that for my heart. And I challenge all of you to pray that for yours and for everybody listening. Any other thoughts before we go from the three of you? As you reflect on everything, or maybe just some sage wisdom. I'm 40 now. I don't know if you knew this.
That's right.
So, I'm just full of wisdom, even more so now.
Well, now that you're 40, you can answer, in all your wisdom, what are you looking forward to in 2024? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I'm throwing this out at you, Matt. It's not on the list here.
No, I don't care. No, that's great.
What do you look forward to as far as GFC or just personally?
Yeah. I am really excited about Luke right now that we're going to be teaching through, and we've told folks it's going to be 70 weeks. Some people are like, what? How long? And don't worry, we're going to mix it up. We're going to take some breaks, but even already, we're 3 weeks in. I just am beginning to see the themes emerge, and I'm just so excited to study Luke and for all of us as a church to experience life in Christ in a deeper way. I really believe he has something special for us in that. And then I think that there are so many areas where right now as a church we are poised to really see God do big things. You mentioned the preschool area. The elementary part of our church is just busting at the seams. There's an energy on Sundays. There's just this excitement to serve, and some of the opportunities that we're going to have in the spring, the summer. So it's kind of a vague answer, but I would just say I'm just excited about the life of the church. I just think, it's a little bit like the Chronicles of Narnia, where somebody says Aslan is on the move. And I don't know who said that, Lucy, somebody. But right now it feels like Aslan is on the move. God's on the move at GFC, and I think we sense it. And so I'm just excited to see where that heads. So thanks for the question.
Yeah.
Anything else? You need any life questions answered?
I'm just excited people have gotten to hear Stephen's speaking voice.
I speak sometimes.
I'm teasing. Not
I don't have
without a guitar.
though, so yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate all three of you so much, and your leadership and just your life before God, the way you love your families. Somebody said it, the best part of ministry is the people. So thankful for each of you. And if any of you who are listening to this, by the way, thank you for joining us today. And if you're listening to this before Christmas Eve, we would love to have you and your family join us at any one of our 4 Christmas candlelight services. So we've got on Saturday, December 23rd, we've got 2 services at 4 and 6 p.m. And on Sunday, December 24th, we have 2 services at 9 and 11 a.m. And if you forget all that, you can find it online. Liz, where can they find the details online?
GFCnow.com/Christmas.
There you go.
Yeah.
Very memorable.
Yeah.
And two, we've been reflecting back on what God's done, and that's possible because of the generosity of God's people, both their time, but also financially. And I just want to encourage all of you, if you would like to give to the ministry of Grace Fellowship Church financially, we would love for you to do that. We'd invite you to do that. We think God uses giving as a way to help us grow spiritually. And when we give, we partner with the heart of God and what He's doing. And so, like many churches, we rely on year-end giving, and we'd encourage you to consider us as you think about that. So you can give, you can mail a check to the church, or you can give online. That's the easiest way to do it at gfcnow.com. But think about that as you consider what God would have you do with your resources. And we would love to know what you thought about this podcast. So send in your comments, your questions for a future episode to podcast@gfcnow.com. And if you would, take 30 seconds to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review, which will help people find this podcast easier and hear the content. Hope you have a great week.